In the scorched land of Big Bend, Texas, where dry winds whisper echoes of the past, an old horse named Scout suddenly began pawing at the cracked earth after 2 years of brutal drought. No one expected what lay beneath the dust, a century-old secret buried in silence. And that secret, once unearthed by a man on the verge of losing everything, would bring an entire town to its knees. The story begins when the land found its voice. The Texas sun cut like a razor. At nearly 100 degrees, everything seemed to hold its breath, except for the weary old ceiling fan in the rickety kitchen of Silver Hollow Ranch. It groaned with every rotation, like it, too, was tired of spinning through decades of one man's life. Earl McKinley sat slumped in a folding chair, eyes fixed on the sun-scorched field outside. He used to call this place the Land of Hope, a name given by his Scottish grandfather back in the 1890s. Now, it was nothing but a cracked stretch of earth cursed by drought. On the table sat a letter from the bank, the words, "Notice of foreclosure," printed in red that looked like dried blood. He rubbed his beard, heavy-hearted. Tomorrow was the deadline. If he didn't sign the deed to sell the land, the bank would come take everything. A soft whinny sounded from the yard. Scout. The dark brown Appaloosa, Grace's final gift before cancer took her. He's an old soul. She'd said the day she brought the colt home from the fair, 10 years ago. "I can't save you from the pain, Earl. But this horse, he'll never leave you." For 10 lonely years, Scout had been the only living soul tied to him. But lately, something about the horse had changed. He no longer grazed peacefully. Instead, Scout paced near the old corral, sniffing around the rotted fence posts, pawing at the ground like he was digging for something. Earl figured it was bats or prairie dogs at first, but after weeks of the same behavior, he started paying closer attention. "What the hell, you think you're a bloodhound now?" he muttered, pulling a cigarette from the pocket of his faded flannel shirt. That's when the back door creaked open. A lazy voice called out, "Gramps, I made instant noodles. You want some?" Earl turned. Standing in the doorway was Lily, his late wife's 17-year-old granddaughter. She'd come down from Austin after her mother, Grace's younger sister, died in a car crash. Lily brought with her loud music, cheap perfume, cut-off shorts, and a permanent chip on her shoulder. On her first day, she called Silver Hollow a damn graveyard in the desert. But today, for the first time, she'd made him a meal, even if it was just noodles. "Thanks, but I'm not hungry," Earl replied, his voice rough as a whetstone. Lily put her hands on her hips. "You gonna sit there all day and watch a horse dig holes?" Earl didn't answer. A hot gust swept across the porch, kicking up dust. Scout let out another whinny, this time louder, more urgent. He was staring toward the edge of the property, where a line of withered oaks cast long shadows over a dry creek bed. Once, that stream had bubbled gently behind the house. Now it was just moss and gravel. Suddenly, the front gate clanged with metal on metal. Earl knew that sound. Roy Bannister. A shiny black Ford Expedition rolled through the dust. Out stepped Roy, a tall man in a sweat-soaked white shirt, crooked tie, and a smile that had no soul behind it. "Afternoon, Mr. McKinley," Roy drawled. "Hope you've had time to consider the bank's offer." Earl stood, bracing his hand against his hip. "I'll give you an answer tomorrow." Roy stepped up onto the porch, holding a stack of papers. "They're hoping for sooner. I'll just leave these here. Folks are real interested in this land. Sure, it's rough around the edges, but the location, prime." Earl said nothing. Lily appeared behind him, watching the stranger from the doorway. Roy glanced at her, then back at Earl. "You know, some folks around here call you the old man guarding sand. But me? I just see a tired man who deserves a break." Scout suddenly let out a loud neigh. He stomped the earth, a sharp crack like a hammer hitting stone. Then he turned, trotted a few feet, and looked back, beckoning. Earl frowned. Roy raised an eyebrow. "Your horse always this jumpy around new faces?" "He's not jumpy around strangers," Earl replied. "He's just got a nose for liars." Roy chuckled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Tomorrow, Mr. McKinley, if you don't sign, there won't be any options left. Trust me." He walked back to his car, turned once more, and said, "If I were you, I'd start packing." The engine roared to life, and the SUV disappeared in a red cloud down the dirt road. Earl clenched the papers in his fist, feeling the heat of the sun burning into the skin of his palm. Lily sat on the porch step, watching Scout circling that same spot near the old fence, pawing the dirt like he was trying to speak. "Why don't you just sell, Gramps?" she asked quietly. "People in Austin live in condos with air conditioning. Out here, it's just dust and death." Earl didn't turn. He kept his eyes on the cracked ground where Scout had stopped, frozen like a statue, staring down at something only he could sense. "This land," he whispered, "is the last thing still alive in my heart." And somewhere in the wind, Earl could almost hear Grace's voice, soft as breath. "There's something buried in this ground, Earl. One day, it'll speak." The old wood-paneled kitchen of Silver Hollow was as silent as a graveyard. On the table lay the foreclosure papers, untouched. Beside them, a wooden mug Earl had used since his days at Paris Island training camp. Inside, the coffee had gone cold, a thin film forming on the surface like a layer of ash. He stared at the bold print on the contract like he could burn through it with his gaze. "Gramps?" Lily's voice came from the kitchen doorway. "You're really planning to stay here? With a horse digging holes and a patch of dirt dry as bone?" Earl didn't respond immediately. He simply set the mug down and slowly stood, his joints groaning like the floorboards beneath his boots. Outside, the sound of Scout's hooves again, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat waking something ancient. "You don't understand," Earl said quietly, voice hollow as cooled ash. "This place isn't just land. It's memory. It's a promise." Lily folded her arms and leaned against the doorframe, eyes scanning the mold-stained kitchen. "To someone, maybe. Not to me. All I smell is sweat and old blood." Earl turned to face her. "You asked why I won't sell," he said slowly. "Because this is all I have left from the past, and you haven't lived long enough to know what it means to lose everything." She didn't reply. Outside, Scout neighed again. This time louder, longer, like a voice crying out in the dark. Earl frowned and stepped onto the porch. The horse was at the same spot near the fence, digging, scraping, and looking back as if he were trying to say something. "Again?" Earl sighed. "What is it this time, Scout?" But something was different. The dirt beneath Scout's hooves wasn't chalky and pale. It was darker, moist. Earl narrowed his eyes and stepped off the porch. Lily followed, trailing behind with her arms crossed. Scout stepped back as Earl approached, eyes glowing under the late sun. "You ever seen him do this before?" Lily asked, curiosity overtaking her usual indifference. Earl nodded, stroking his beard. "Been going on for weeks, but this is the first time he's not walked away." He knelt, brushing the surface of the soil. The ground here was odd, not dust, not sand. It was tightly packed and embedded with small stones arranged in rows, almost deliberately. "You see that?" he whispered. "That's not natural." Lily squatted beside him. "Looks like stones, laid out, like old steps, or a cover of some kind," Earl murmured, pressing harder. The dirt gave way more easily here. Scout stood nearby, motionless, watching every move, as if awaiting confirmation of something greater than instinct. Earl glanced toward the dry creek bed where he'd once proposed to Grace. "You know," he said, voice gravelly, "your mom, Grace, she told me once, there's something buried in this ground, Earl. One day, it'll speak." I laughed at her. But now, Lily didn't move. She had never seen him speak with such fragility, such tremble in his voice. "Everything around here's already dead," she said, brushing a stone with her finger. "If something's still alive down there, maybe it's worth hearing." That night, there was no wind. Scout lay near the barn, ears alert like a sentry on duty. Earl sat in the living room, surrounded by silence and shadows. In his hands, a worn photo, Grace smiling, one arm around Lucas, the other holding Annie. It had been their last Thanksgiving as a family. The contract still lay on the table, still unsigned. A soft breeze stirred the curtain. Hoofbeats, louder this time, urgent, broke the stillness like a fire alarm. Earl jumped up, heart pounding. He grabbed the flashlight hanging near the door and flung it open. "Scout?" he called. The horse was circling the same patch of ground, whinnying wildly. He stopped, turned to look at Earl, then backed toward the creek, toward the oak tree they'd named the Keeper of Dreams. "Really?" Earl groaned. 2 in the morning, and this is when you want answers?" But in his gut, he knew this was no ordinary call. He threw on his old leather jacket, stuffed an extra battery in his pocket, and followed the light of Scout's lead. Lily, hearing the commotion, grabbed her hoodie and joined him without a word. The Big Bend night cut like glass, the cool air a stark contrast to the daytime heat. Each step sank softly into the dampened earth. so unlike the hardened clay it usually was. When they reached the spot, Scout stood frozen. Earl raised the flashlight. Same place, but it looked different now. The soil was darker, like it had been watered. He knelt and touched it, surprised to feel moisture. "No way," he muttered. Lily knelt beside him, pressing her palm into the ground. Mud squelched between her fingers. "Gramps," she said softly, "is this groundwater?" "No, not quite," Earl replied, narrowing his eyes. "It's not water, this smell." He brought his fingers to his nose and recoiled. A smell he hadn't encountered since war. The smell of leaking fuel near armored convoys. "Lily," he whispered, "do you smell that?" She sniffed and wrinkled her nose. "It's like oil or gas." Their eyes met. Scout let out a piercing whinny, one that cut through the stillness and stomped again on the damp soil. Earl stared at the horse, then at the ground, then up at the sky. The Big Bend night was still, but for the first time in years, Earl felt it in his bones. The land was whispering back. The next morning, sunlight spilled over the mesquite ridge to the east, casting a golden sheen over the cracked fields of Silver Hollow. But Earl McKinley no longer looked at the sun with resignation. Something had changed in him, subtle but certain, ever since last night, when Scout led him to that strange patch of damp soil beneath the old oak tree. Lily had been up early, sitting cross-legged on the porch steps, eating cold cereal with a wooden spoon. Her eyes remained fixed on the corral, where Scout now stood silently, contemplative, as if aware he had awakened something long buried beneath the earth. "What do you think?" she asked, stirring the milk in her bowl. Earl sank into the rocking chair beside her, dragging on an unlit cigarette between his fingers. "I think," he said, eyes still on that patch of earth, "we need to keep digging." Lily swallowed hard. "I'll grab the shovel." Together, they walked toward the dry creek bed, toward the spot where Scout had tapped his hoof like a messenger delivering a code from beyond time. The horse followed, untethered, like an old guardian witnessing a truth about to surface. Earl dug first, each strike cutting through soil softened by the rain from the night before. Lily joined in with a second shovel, sweat darkening the back of her hoodie. With every layer removed, the smell of oil grew stronger, thick, pungent, like something sealed too long beneath the surface. After just over 30 minutes, Earl's shovel struck something solid. They both froze. Scout gave a low whinny, almost like encouragement. "There's something down here," Earl muttered. He dropped to his knees and brushed the dirt aside with his hands. A cold metal surface emerged, rusted, pitted, but unmistakably man-made. "A lid to a box or a chest?" he murmured, voice trembling. Lily helped pull away the remaining dirt. It was a small rectangular trunk, no longer than 2 hands wide. The latch was corroded, the surface eaten by time. No markings, except a faint letter M etched into the metal. Perhaps McKinley. "Are you sure you want to open this?" Lily asked. Earl didn't reply. He pulled out a folding knife from his pocket and gently pried at the rotten latch. With a dry click, the lid creaked open. Inside were 3 items: an old oil drilling map, the edges scorched and brittle, stamped by the Texas Bureau of Mineral Resources, dated 1924. A document, mineral rights deed for the land beneath the ranch, signed by Henry McKinley, Earl's grandfather. A leather-bound journal, worn and cracked, its pages dense with handwriting, signed by Isaac McKinley, founder of Silver Hollow. Earl's hands shook as he lifted the journal. On the first page, written in faded black ink, "If you are reading this, the land has spoken, and someone has listened. There is oil beneath this ground, but it is not merely opportunity, it is a test. To unlock it, one must preserve the soul of this land, because the earth may feed or destroy depending on who holds the reins." Lily sat speechless. Your grandfather knew? Nearly 100 years ago?" Earl nodded slowly, lips trembling. He kept this secret because he didn't trust men to face their own greed. She unfolded the map. Its symbols matched the exact area they stood in. A red X sat precisely over the oak tree. "Now I get it," she whispered. "Why you couldn't sell the land." Earl folded the journal, tucked it gently into his coat pocket. "And now you get it," he said. "Why Scout's been digging." They stood together, silence falling over them like reverence. A hidden oil vein, an ancestral legacy had been revealed, not by fortune or science, but by a horse's instinct and an old man's unwavering bond to the soil. By the time they returned home, the sun was high. The breeze on the porch carried the scent of moist earth and oil. Earl had never smelled Silver Hollow come alive like that, alive with whispers and promise. But before he could rest, that familiar engine growl returned. The black Ford SUV kicked up another red cloud on the road. Roy Bannister stepped out, leather bag in hand, smile thicker than the day before. "Mr. McKinley," he called. "I think the time's come. Good things don't last forever." Earl stood with his arms crossed on the porch. "I told you I'd give you an answer today. My answer's no." Roy's smile faltered, just for a moment. "You know, I get the feeling. You're hiding something. Most men don't walk away from money without a reason. To me, this land's worth more than your dollars. And you'll never take it, not even if you come back 10 times. Roy lowered his voice, pulling out his phone. He played a short recording, Earl's voice from the previous night murmuring to Scout, "If that's oil I smell." "Grace, you were right? You're spying on me?" Earl snapped. "No law says I can't drop a small device out back." Roy shrugged. "Just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything important. Now, I think the bank would be very interested." Lily stepped outside, holding the leather journal. "This is what the bank should be interested in," she said firmly. "Mineral rights deed, signed by his grandfather, dated 1924. You want a legal war? Let's go." Roy stared at her, his eyes narrowed. "This little girl? Definitely not the city brat I thought." "No," Lily said. "I'm the next generation of Silver Hollow, and we know what we're defending." Roy scoffed, turned on his heel. "Careful with secrets," he called, then peeled off in a roar of dust. On the porch, Earl let out a slow breath. Lily stood beside him, still gripping the journal. Behind them, Scout neighed, a long, steady call. Not a warning, a declaration. A chapter of the land had been turned, and now the enemy knew it was alive. Silver Hollow sat still, like the land itself was trying to seal away what had just been unearthed. After the tense encounter with Roy Bannister, Earl McKinley returned to the old wooden kitchen, the scent of oil still lingering on his sleeves. Outside, Scout grazed quietly beneath the oak, but his ears stayed upright and alert, listening, it seemed, to voices only he could hear from deep beneath the soil. There wasn't a cloud in the sky, but the wind had shifted. The salty breath of the Pecos Desert blew in, laced with wild mint from the fence line. Earl narrowed his eyes. Something about the air felt off, as if the land was turning in its sleep. Inside the living room, Lily sat reading Isaac McKinley's leather journal under a flickering oil lamp. The handwriting leaned slightly rightward, uneven but forceful, describing the oil vein, the fear of greed, and finally, a warning in the final lines. "If one day the land rises and someone hears its voice, remember this: what is given is not to be owned, but to be guarded." She closed the journal and held it to her chest, as if embracing an untold chapter of her family's past. Dusk fell faster than usual. The moon was missing. Clouds rolled in from the west, low, heavy, the color of old iron. "Gramps," Lily stepped onto the porch. "I think it's gonna rain." Earl looked up from the map he was studying under a magnifier. "Not likely. Big Ben don't get June rain. Unless," he trailed off, "unless it's an omen." Then it came. A low rumble of thunder, like chains dragging across the valley. The first drop fell fat and heavy, striking the tin roof like a warning shot. Scout neighed, not in fear but in excitement. In seconds, the skies opened. Rain poured like it had been waiting years. The wind howled, carrying the scent of earth, electricity, and crude oil. Earl and Lily rushed out onto the porch, faces turned skyward. "It's real," Earl whispered. "First real rain in 18 months. "Maybe the land's waking up," Lily said. The wind rattled the windows. A door burst open in the hayshed. Scout galloped across the yard, unafraid, like the rain was a long-lost friend. "Gramps, look!" Lily pointed. Where the dry creek had been, where they'd found the rusted box, the flood of rain was washing away layers of brittle soil. More dark streaks appeared. Oil. It seeped to the surface, slow and thick, like blood from the heart of the earth. Earl stood frozen. The image, the land crying with rain, bleeding with oil, seared into his soul. "Grace," he murmured, her name barely a breath. And as if answering, a gust lifted the old cloth draped over Grace's favorite bench. It floated briefly, then settled, right in the middle of the exposed patch of oil-slick soil. "I'm not sleeping tonight," Earl said. "Tomorrow morning, we see a lawyer." Dawn broke slowly. The storm left behind dark puddles and soft trenches in the field. Scout rested quietly by the fence, his eyes strangely serene. Lily packed her backpack carefully, sliding the journal, the map, and the mineral rights document into a waterproof tube. "You sure you're ready for this?" Earl asked as they stood by the old pickup. "You think I came back just to escape the city?" she smirked. Earl chuckled, rare but real. They left Silver Hollow at 7 a.m., heading for the town of Alpine, home to Attorney McCallan, an old friend of Grace's. On the road, Lily asked, "Did you ever think you'd leave that land?" "No," Earl replied. "But if leaving is what it takes to protect it, I'll go as far as I have to." McCallan's law office sat at the end of Main Street, next to Mrs. Jenkins' old bakery. The elderly lawyer limped to the door, glasses slipping as his eyes caught the name Isaac McKinley on the papers. "Good Lord," he muttered. "I thought this was just family lore." He examined the documents carefully. When he reached the mineral rights deed signed by Henry McKinley, his eyes lit up. "Earl, this deed's strong enough to challenge any sale if the bank can't prove a legal relinquishment of rights." "And what if the last owner was my grandfather?" Earl asked. "Then it passes to you and to your heirs. You can contest the foreclosure completely." Lily gripped Earl's arm, her voice trembling. "We have a shot." "But," McCallan warned, "watch Roy. He's not acting alone. Word is he's securing land for a private energy firm." Earl's eyes hardened like burnt timber. "Then they'll have to walk over my bones to reach Silver Hollow." That afternoon, returning to the ranch, Scout suddenly neighed and bolted toward the front gate. Earl followed quickly, only to find it hanging open. Tire tracks. Fresh. Off-road pattern. "Gramps," Lily shouted from the barn. "Someone cut the fence!" Earl grabbed the flashlight and ran. The barn gate was swinging loose. The latch had been snipped. Scout was bleeding from a fresh cut on his hind leg, thin wire marks around the fetlock. Earl's rage boiled over. No one touches my horse," he roared. Lily cradled Scout's neck, whispering comfort. The horse shivered but didn't tremble in fear. His eyes, steady, knowing, seemed to say, "It's begun." Earl stood in the middle of the yard, fists clenched, the wind whipping his shirt, the scent of oil thick in the air. "Tomorrow," he said, voice like iron, "we strike first." The next morning, the air around Silver Hollow carried the heavy scent of blood, dust, and crude oil. Scout was still limping slightly, his rear leg carefully wrapped in clean cloth and desert herbs from an old first aid box Grace had left behind. The horse stood quietly, obedient, like he understood he had just survived an attack, and that it was only the beginning. Earl stood at the fence line, gripping the long unused Winchester rifle pulled from the old barn. The morning wind ruffled his sun-bleached shirt and tangled his gray hair, but his eyes were razor-sharp again, like the blade he'd once carried through the scorched streets of Fallujah. "You lock all the doors?" he asked, still scanning the far edge of the field. "All of them," Lily replied, stepping beside him. "Scout's gonna be okay, just surface wounds, but someone was trying to scare us." Earl nodded. "Cutting wire, breaking the gate, barbed traps," he muttered. "They want us to know. They're watching." Lily gripped the deed tube tighter in her hands. "We can sue them. We'll do more than that." He turned toward her. "Now it's our move." By midday, Earl and Lily were in the pickup truck, carrying the full set of evidence: Isaac's journal, the drilling map, the mineral deed, and a short phone video Lily had filmed showing oil bubbling through the soil after the storm. They drove to the Land Protection Office in Marfa, the official records center for all underground mineral rights in the region. There, Earl filed a formal motion to reassert ownership of the subsoil based on historic documents, with Attorney McCallan named as witness. The red-haired clerk flipped through the papers and nodded. "This is enough to secure full protection of the land beneath Silver Hollow. Until a judge rules otherwise, no one can touch that property." Lily exhaled deeply, but Earl gave only a quiet nod. He knew legal power was only part of the battle. The rest was human. When they returned to Alpine, Roy Bannister was already waiting by the bank parking lot. His shirt this time was designer and his car freshly washed. But the smirk was gone. "You played a big card, Earl," Roy said, his voice stripped of pretense. "Now what? Gonna sit around waiting for the oil to flow like some holy spring?" "I'm waiting for justice," Earl replied coldly, leaning one hand on the hood of the truck. "And if I ever see you set foot on my land again—" Roy stepped forward, his tone dropping. "You don't get it, old man. I've got a corporation behind me. You're just an emotional relic living in a memory. Me? I make money off land, not because I love it, but because I know how to exploit it. And that's exactly why the land will never reward you, Earl replied calmly. It'll just eat you alive. Roy sneered, but the words didn't stick. That evening, Silver Hollow was locked tighter than ever. Scout was brought into the inner stall. Salt and crushed chili flakes were sprinkled around the fence posts to ward off predators. Lily fell asleep on the old couch, Isaac's journal resting on her chest. Earl sat on the porch, holding the rifle, eyes focused on the darkness, as if it hid something about to crawl out. Then a sound, hoofbeats, but not Scout's. Earl rose instantly. A dark horse crossed the tree line and stopped just outside the fence. Someone was riding. He raised the rifle. "Who's there?" he barked. Silence. Then a young voice answered, I was hired to inspect pipelines. Must have taken the wrong trail." Earl stepped forward, gun low but steady. "Then ride the right trail. And if I ever catch you near this land again." The rider gave a crooked grin. "You won't always have the strength to threaten people." He turned his horse and disappeared into the shadows. Earl tightened his grip. "The game started, Grace," he whispered. The next morning, Lily awoke to a panicked whinny. Scout was gone. "Gramps," she screamed. Earl ran out barefoot, just in time to see the corral gate wide open, hoofprints scattered toward the dry creek bed. They jumped in the truck and tore across the dirt road. Clouds gathered. Straw and dust flew as Lily gripped the wheel, fighting the bumps. They spotted Scout under the old oak, but he wasn't alone. A man knelt beside him, the same intruder from the night before. A geoscanner in hand, eyes wide as Earl skidded the truck to a stop. "Step away from that horse," Earl shouted, rifle raised. "Hold on, I was just scanning." "You're trespassing on private mineral property," Lily yelled. "I've got you on video. One more step and it's a felony." The man dropped the scanner and bolted. Scout limped toward Earl, blood seeping from a fresh cut along his flank. The intruder had likely jabbed him to provoke movement and get clearer seismic readings. Earl knelt beside him, voice thick. "I'm sorry, boy. I should have guarded you better." Lily sat hard on the ground, fists clenched. "They won't stop." "And neither will we," Earl said, his eyes glowing with a fire long thought gone. "This afternoon, we talked to the press." At 3 p.m., Earl stood in front of a local KRTX news camera, cowboy hat shading his eyes, the fields of Silver Hollow behind him. Lily stood beside him. Scout, bandaged but proud, stood just beyond. "I'm not selling this land, not leasing it, not drilling it. No one will take the blood and memory my grandfather left behind, and if I must, I'll die on this dirt." The video aired. The town buzzed. Messages poured in, some with prayers, others with seeds, bottles of water, even pickup trucks offering overnight watch duty. Roy saw the broadcast, whiskey glass in hand, then shattered it against the wall. "He doesn't know who he's up against," he hissed. But the truth was, Earl did. And this time, he wasn't alone. The morning after the televised interview, Silver Hollow stirred with a strange new energy. The wind rolled down from the eastern hills, brushing through dry wheat and mesquite, carrying the scent of earth, old hay, and something else, hope. The kind of hope Earl thought he'd buried 30 years ago. Scout had eaten a little. His gait was still stiff, but he stood tall. Lily gently applied antiseptic, her fingers trembling but steady. "I won't let them hurt you again," she whispered into his mane. Scout turned slightly, one ear tilting toward her, as if he understood. From town, a trail of vehicles began arriving. A group of journalism students from the University of El Paso brought cameras and audio gear. A former Marine named Mac Dawson, missing one leg from Iraq, drove up in a dusty Jeep, carrying a handmade sign that read, "Silver Hollow is part of all of us." Lily stood on the porch, watching them. Her throat tightened. "I think," she said slowly, "this has become more than a land dispute." Earl didn't answer. He was at the fence line, hammering fresh boards, tightening wire, like he was rebuilding not just a barrier, but his dignity. That evening, they held a small bonfire in the center of the ranch. People brought cornbread, coffee, folding chairs, and a guitar or two. Scout was led out, a soft wool blanket over his back. A little boy approached, brushed his mane, whispered something only the horse could hear, and hugged his mother. Lily stood and stepped into the firelight. "I know none of us are lawyers or politicians," she began, voice clear. "But we're farmers, soldiers, citizens, and land. Land isn't just dirt, it's memory, blood. the voice of those who came before. Applause rippled through the gathering. An elderly woman rose. My husband rode Scout in 2008. That horse saved him when a tree fell and trapped his leg. He's not just a horse, he's history. Earl nodded quietly, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. We'll protect this land, he said low, no matter the cost. 2 days later, McCallan called. I have good news. And bad, her voice echoed over the speaker. Good first? Lily asked. The State Resource Agency has temporarily frozen all drilling permits at Silver Hollow pending investigation into forged geological filings. And the bad? Roy Bannister just filed a counterclaim. He says he has a witness and an unpublished document from 1996 showing Earl relinquished the mineral rights. Silence filled the cabin. No such document exists, Earl growled. It's a fake, Lily added. McCallan sighed. We'll fight it, but prepare for court. Earl looked toward Scout, now standing peacefully beneath the oak, like a flag planted in sacred soil. You do what you need to, Earl said. So will I. That afternoon, a dusty car pulled off the county road and stopped near the entrance. A tall, silver-haired man stepped out with a cane and dark glasses. I'm Dean Holloway, he said. Used to be a resource assessor for the state. I heard about Silver Hollow, and I know for a fact some files were altered. Earl watched him, wary. Why come here now? I worked for Bannister. I know how he creates documents that never existed, and I want to make it right. He handed over a leather binder. Inside were copies of the original 1996 land filings, unaltered, time-stamped, showing Earl Whitmore had retained all underground rights. No mention of revocation. If you're willing, I'll testify, Dean said quietly. I've got nothing left to lose, but I won't die with that stain on my soul. Earl gripped the man's hand. You just saved my family's future. That evening, Lily hand-delivered the new evidence to McCallan. The news broke within hours. Roy Bannister, watching the coverage from a boardroom, flung his glass against the wall. Old bastard betrayed us, he hissed. One of his partners smirked. Maybe it's time for Plan B. 2 days before the hearing, Scout disappeared. The stall was open, the halter cut, hoofprints trailed into the woods, then vanished. Earl dropped to his knees, white with panic. They've taken him. Lily grabbed his hand. We'll find him, just like we found the land, just like we found the truth. Earl's eyes flickered, dim embers sparking back to life. Call Mac, call the students, call the news. Tonight, we ride. And under the cloak of darkness, a caravan of dusty trucks and old jeeps cut across the Texas plains, searching for something no one could put a price on. A Mustang horse. And a piece of the soul of Silver Hollow. Night fell fast across the Big Bend plains, like a heavy black curtain dropped over a land still pulsing with truth. A sliver of moon peeked through a cloud bank, casting just enough light to catch the faintest signs, hoofprints scattered in the sand, the only clues left from the bold abduction. Earl wore his old leather jacket, flashlight in one hand, a carved walking stick in the other. Strapped to his hip was a Colt .45 he hadn't touched since the war. Scout would never leave unless someone made him, he said to Lily as they climbed into the truck. Lily nodded, clutching the old rope halter she'd always used on Scout during their morning walks. Mac Dawson led the convoy. Behind him came the student team's SUV, a local news van, and the dusty sheriff's jeep, driven by Henry Boone, who once rode Scout himself as a teenager. They split into search groups, combing every arroyo and cedar grove. Voices echoed through the night. Scout, Scout boy. Only the wind replied. Around 3 a.m., a student spotted dried blood on a slashed mesquite trunk, crushed grass, tire tracks. They've caged him, Earl muttered, his jaw tightening. I know one place, said Sheriff Boone. Bellows Camp, old drilling site, shut down after a shootout years back. The group shifted course. Engines roared as headlights tore down the winding dirt roads like lightning bolts. The Bellows compound emerged from the dark, a sagging wooden shack and a rusted-out barn. Inside, they heard the sound of metal scraping, a low, pained whinny. Earl jumped from the truck. Scout. Another cry echoed, not fierce but desperate. Like a child calling for home. The barn door was chained shut. Mac broke the lock with a crowbar. Flashlights flooded the shadows. There he was, Scout. Bloodied, tied, one leg suspended, but his eyes still shined like distant stars. Lily sobbed, We're here, boy, we're here. They cut him loose, wrapped his wounds. Earl knelt, placed his hand gently on Scout's forehead. I'm sorry, old friend, I should have stood closer. Scout leaned into him. A quiet warmth passed through Earl's palm, like Grace herself was there, smiling through the silence. By sunrise, the town of Terlingua was buzzing. The kidnapping had gone public. Roy Bannister was arrested. A former contractor confessed. Roy ordered the abduction to force Earl into surrendering the land. That morning, Earl and Lily appeared on KTV Morning News. Scout stood behind them, bandaged but proud. "This horse didn't just save my grandfather," Lily said, voice steady. "He reminded us all, land can't be stolen if you have the courage to stand for it." The upcoming court hearing was dropped. The state issued a full ruling. All mineral rights under Silver Hollow belonged to the Whitmore family, non-transferable, protected by legacy. Roy faced further charges: fraud, destruction of property, conspiracy to kidnap. 1 month later, Silver Hollow wore a new skin. The rain had been no accident. Streams had returned. Cracks in the ground now shimmered with natural oil. But Earl never sold. Instead, he signed the charter for the Grace Whitmore Foundation, a nonprofit to use oil profits to support drought-stricken farmers across West Texas. Lily received a scholarship from the University of Texas, majoring in sustainable resource management. But she didn't leave yet. "I'll go," she told Earl, "but Silver Hollow still needs me for 1 more season." Scout made a full recovery. Though old, he walked the white-fenced yard each morning, calm and watchful. Local children came to visit. Some brought bread, others whispered wishes. They called him the Spirit Horse, a symbol of defiance, a symbol of faith. 1 year later, on a warm August evening, Earl sat rocking on the porch, watching Lily laugh with a young farmhand across the field. The pasture in front of him glowed green, greener than he ever remembered. Under the old oak, Scout stood tall, his shadow long in the amber light. The wind swept in, carrying the scent of warm earth, dry hay, and something else. Something like Grace's laughter. Earl closed his eyes. His hand rested gently on the worn wood of the armrest. Near the barn, a small plaque had been placed. Carved into it were these words: "They say the land doesn't speak, but if you listen long enough, it just might sing you a song you'll never forget." If you believe that some animals are born to lead us to truth, drop a simple comment below. Type 1 if this story moved you, or 0 if you still don't believe in such miracles. And don't forget to subscribe to True Animal Stories so you never miss another emotional and surprising journey, like Earl and Scout's. Thank you for riding with us, and we'll see you in the next story.